My husband thought he was being clever the night he switched to Italian at the dinner table. Right in front of me, right in front of the man whose signature he needed more than his next breath. He called me hollow. He called me a leech draped in pearls. He laughed, low and easy, like a man who had already won the game, and said he was going to leave me with nothing but the lock screen on my phone. By Thursday. What he did not know was that I had spent 3 years studying in Florence before my first business deal. What he did not know was that I had understood every syllable, every pause, every cruel consonant of his little performance. And what he absolutely, completely, catastrophically did not know was that by the time the dessert plates were cleared, I had already drafted the first 5 moves of his destruction inside my head. My name is Serena Ashford. I am 33 years old, and I am about to tell you the story of how I burned down a house that was built on my bones. But before I do that, I want to say something because I have been quiet for a long time. Too long. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, feeling invisible, feeling underestimated, feeling like the walls of your own life were built by someone else's hands, then this story is for you. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me, from which city are you listening? Because I want to see how far a woman's voice can carry when she finally decides to speak. Help me build this community so we can keep bringing you more of these stories, raw, real, and told without apology. Now, let me take you back. The restaurant was called Cielo Blue. It sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. The kind of place where the napkins were folded into swans, and the menu had no prices because if you had to ask, you were not supposed to be there. My husband, Matteo Ashford, had booked the private dining room on the east side. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of Lake Michigan that looked like someone had painted it specifically for the occasion. He had been preparing for this dinner for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of rehearsed sentences, rehearsed posture, rehearsed charm. I had arrived in a champagne-colored dress I had bought 3 seasons ago and rarely worn. Matteo had told me to wear something elegant but understated. He used the word understated the way people use it when they mean invisible. The man across the table was Signore Enzo Ferrante. He was 64 years old and carried himself with the particular gravity of someone who had never once in his adult life needed to raise his voice to be taken seriously. He was the founder of Ferrante Capital, an Italian private equity group that had recently opened its North American office. He wore no watch. Men like Ferrante did not need to know what time it was. Time adjusted itself around them. The dinner began in English. Pleasantries, wine selection, the kind of small talk that is really just an audition for the real conversation underneath. Matteo was performing beautifully. He was animated without being loud, confident without being arrogant, at least in English. He had practiced this version of himself the way an actor practices a role. I had watched him do it in our living room for 3 weeks, running his lines in front of the mirror above the fireplace. A Barolo that Ferrante had selected personally. And something shifted. Ferrante leaned back and said something in Italian, casual, comfortable, the kind of switch that meant he was moving into a more honest register of himself. And Matteo followed him. His Italian was not perfect, but it was functional enough. And the moment he stepped into that language, his mask slipped. Not the social mask, the deeper one. He looked at me briefly, dismissively, the way you glance at a piece of furniture that has been in the room so long, you have stopped registering it as an object with any particular significance. Then he said, in Italian, to Ferrante, that I was lovely to look at, but not to worry about engaging me in any serious discussion. He said I was the kind of woman who was good at spending money and smiling for photographs. He said I had the business acumen of a potted plant. He laughed at his own joke. Ferrante smiled politely, the way a refined man smiles at something that is beneath him. And then Matteo said the thing that changed everything. He said that after Thursday, I would no longer be his problem. He said the divorce papers were already drafted, and that by the time I understood what had happened, the accounts would already be restructured, and the house would be in a corporate entity I could not touch. He said, still in Italian, still relaxed, still sipping his $600 wine, that he had already spoken to his lawyer about the property transfer, and that I would be entitled to a settlement so small it was almost funny. He called it a parting gift. I smiled, the way a woman smiles when she has been trained her whole marriage to make other people comfortable at the expense of her own truth. I smiled, and I lifted my water glass and I took a slow, measured sip, and I thought, in the precise, formal Italian of the University of Florence, where I had spent 3 of the most intellectually alive years of my life. You have made a very serious mistake, Matteo. I did not move a muscle. I did not break out of rhythm. I asked Ferrante in English whether he had visited the Chicago Art Institute during his stay, and the conversation shifted seamlessly, and the dinner continued, and the candles burned low, and my husband sat across from me absolutely certain that he was the most dangerous person at the table. He was wrong. The car ride home was the kind of silence that has texture. Matteo sat beside me in the back of the car and scrolled his phone with the loose, satisfied posture of a man who believed his plans were airtight. At one point he looked over at me and said I had done well tonight, that I had not embarrassed him, that he was glad I had kept quiet during the business conversation, because frankly, he said, these things went better when the partners brought someone decorative rather than opinionated. He said this kindly. That was the part that turned my stomach. He said it the way you compliment a child on sitting still during a long drive. I said, "Thank you, Matteo." I said it softly. I looked out the window at the lights reflecting off the wet streets of Chicago, and I thought about everything I needed to do before Thursday. We had 4 days. When we got home, he went directly to his office on the 2nd floor. I heard the lock click. He always locked it when he was on calls he did not want me near. I had long ago stopped pretending that bothered me. What bothered me was something else entirely. I went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. I stood at the sink and looked out at the back garden, dark and bare in the November cold. And I began to think the way I had been trained to think, methodically, structurally, with complete emotional detachment. Because here is what Matteo did not know about the woman he had married. Before I became Serena Ashford, before this house and this kitchen and this marriage, I was Serena Calloway. I had a business degree from Northwestern, a second language certification from the University of Florence, and a consulting firm I had built over 7 years that specialized in corporate crisis management for mid-sized financial companies. I was, if I am being completely honest, exceptional at it. My clients paid me to walk into rooms that were on fire and leave them looking like nothing had ever burned. I had saved 3 CFOs from indictment, renegotiated 2 hostile acquisitions, and once, quietly, rerouted an entire board restructuring in the span of a weekend. I had sold my firm 2 years into our marriage. Matteo had asked me to. He said it created complications because his investment company worked adjacent to some of my clients. He said it was a conflict of interest. He said we did not need the money. He said it with such reasonable, loving, logical calm that I had believed him. What he had not told me was that one of my firm's key clients was the same company he was trying to position himself to acquire. And by removing me from the picture, he had removed the one person in his orbit who might have understood what he was doing before it was done. I had sold my firm for less than it was worth because I was in love, and I trusted the man who told me it was the right thing to do. I thought about that now, standing at the kitchen sink. I picked up my phone. Not the personal phone Matteo knew about, the secondary one I used for consulting work I had quietly resumed over the past 18 months, work I had taken on under my maiden name, Calloway, routed through a business address I maintained separately, a habit I had kept from my crisis years, always maintain a clean operational line. Matteo had no idea. I opened my contacts and found the name I was looking for, Ingrid Voss. Ingrid was a forensic accountant based in New York. She was also one of the most ferocious investigators I had ever worked with. I had brought her in 3 times during my firm years. She had a memory like a hard drive and the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching the numbers tell their ugly truth. I texted her, 4 words, "I need your help." Her reply came in under 2 minutes. "When and how bad?" I typed back, "Thursday deadline, federal bad." She replied, "Call me in 10. I went upstairs, past Matteo's locked office, past the portrait of us at our wedding that hung in the hallway, past the version of my life that was about to be completely dismantled. I went into the guest bathroom at the far end of the hall. I ran the tap. I called Ingrid. She picked up immediately. I told her everything I had heard at dinner. She listened without interrupting. "Okay," she said. "What do you have access to?" His home office, I said. His personal laptop. Our joint accounts. And I have a feeling the secondary accounts are somewhere I can find them if I look. How much time do we have before he moves anything? He is planning to transfer on Wednesday, I said. The dinner on Thursday is supposed to be the signing. He needs everything restructured before Ferrante commits capital. Ingrid was quiet for a moment. We need to move tomorrow, she said. Early. I know, I said. Serena. Her voice was careful. What exactly are we trying to do here? Protect your assets, or something larger? I looked at myself in the mirror, above the running tap. I looked at the woman I had become, in 4 years of shrinking myself into a shape that fit someone else's idea of a good wife. Both, I said, but let's start with something larger. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, beside a man who had been planning to discard me for, based on what I had now pieced together from memory and context, at minimum 3 months. I tracked the clues backwards, the way I used to track financial irregularities. The weekend trip to Milan in September that he said was for business. The new phone he had bought in October, and registered under a company name I had not recognized. The dinner last month with his lawyer that he had described as routine partnership maintenance. None of it was routine. I waited until his breathing became slow and even. Then I slipped out of bed, took my secondary phone from the pocket of my robe, and went downstairs. I made coffee. While it brewed, I went to the small writing desk in the den that Matteo used for personal correspondence when he wanted to feel old-fashioned. The top drawer was unlocked. Inside, beneath a stack of architectural design magazines he never actually read, was an accordion folder. I opened it. The first document I pulled out was a letter from a law firm I did not recognize, Bellini and Associates. It was dated 6 weeks ago. It outlined the proposed terms of a postnuptial asset restructuring. It named the specific accounts. It named the house. It named a secondary property in Lake Geneva I did not know Matteo owned. A second property, in his name alone, that he had purchased 18 months ago. Then I photographed every page. The second document was more interesting. It was a wire transfer confirmation, $500,000, moved 3 weeks ago from one of our joint investment accounts to an entity called Ashford Meridian LLC. I had never heard of Ashford Meridian LLC. I searched the name quickly on my phone. The company was registered in Delaware, listed 2 weeks before the transfer. The registered agent was Matteo's personal lawyer, a man named Gregor Stahl, who had attended our wedding and given a toast about the beauty of lasting partnerships. The third document was the worst. It was a preliminary contract between Matteo's investment firm and Ferrante Capital. The contract outlined a joint acquisition of a mid-sized logistics company based in Milwaukee. The acquisition was being structured as a leveraged buyout. The collateral listed was the equity in our primary residence, the house I had put $600,000 of my own inheritance into when we bought it 4 years ago. Matteo had arranged to use the equity in my house, without my signature, to secure a business deal that I had never been told about. And the collateral section had a co-borrower line with my name already typed into it. Someone was planning to sign that line for me. I sat very still for a long moment. The coffee maker beeped. I did not move. They were going to use my name. They were going to put my financial identity on a contract I had never seen. And then, when the deal closed and the divorce papers were served, I would be legally attached to a debt instrument on a deal I knew nothing about, while Matteo walked away with the payout. This was not just a divorce. This was a setup. I picked up my secondary phone. I texted Ingrid the photographs. Her response came 4 minutes later. This is wire fraud, possibly identity fraud, depending on how they execute the signature. Do not touch any of the joint accounts yet. Do not let him know you have seen this. I am already pulling public records on Ashford Meridian. Then she sent a second message. Do you trust anyone inside Ferrante's organization? I stared at that question for a long time, and then I thought of something. Her name was Claudia De Rosa. She was 38 years old and had been Enzo Ferrante's head of due diligence for the North American office for the past 2 years. Before that, she had spent 6 years working for a regulatory consulting firm in Geneva. We had met once, briefly, at a financial summit in Toronto 18 months ago. We had spoken for perhaps 20 minutes over coffee. But in those 20 minutes, she had mentioned something I had filed away and never expected to need. She had said that Ferrante had once walked away from a $90 million deal in Frankfurt the moment his team discovered the target company had a single undisclosed subsidiary. He had said that a man who hides one thing has a habit of hiding things. I remembered thinking at the time that it was a beautiful principle. I found her email address through a contact at a regulatory firm I had worked with during my Callaway days. I wrote to her at 2 a.m. from a secure email account registered under my consulting identity. I wrote in Italian. I told her I had information relevant to an active acquisition her firm was evaluating in Chicago. I told her the information was material, documented, and time-sensitive. I told her I was available to speak at her earliest convenience, and that I had reason to believe the principals on the opposing side were not operating in good faith with respect to the collateral structure of the proposed deal. I signed it S. Callaway, Independent Risk Consultant. I sent it. I closed the laptop. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and I drank it slowly, and I looked out at the November sky, beginning its slow gray lightening toward dawn, and I thought about all the ways a woman disappears in a marriage before she even realizes she is vanishing. I had been told I was not needed. I had been told I was decorative. I had been told to be quiet, to be elegant, to be understated. I had done all of those things. And then, in the quiet of my own kitchen at 2:30 a.m, I decided to stop. Monday moved like a chess game in slow motion. Matteo left the house at 7:15. He kissed me on the forehead. He smelled of his usual cedar cologne, and beneath that the faint chemical edge of someone operating on adrenaline and secrecy. He told me he would be home late. He told me the week was going to be busy. He told me not to wait up. I told him I understood. The moment the front gate clicked shut behind his car, I went upstairs to his office. The lock was a standard interior privacy lock, the kind that interior designers install in home offices to look intentional rather than functional. I had watched a video about this exact lock model 3 weeks ago, after the first time I had found myself standing outside his office door, feeling shut out of my own house. I used a thin flathead from the kitchen junk drawer and had it open in under 90 seconds. I sat in his chair. His desk was clean in the way that only guilty people keep their desks clean. A performance of order. I opened his laptop. The password was the year we got married, combined with the street name of the house he had grown up in. I knew it, because I had watched him type it once without realizing I was paying attention. People assume that proximity creates blindness. Sometimes, it creates the opposite. I was inside in 30 seconds. I plugged in the encrypted drive Ingrid had overnighted to my consulting address and had rerouted to a package locker 2 blocks away. I ran the mirror program. While it ran, I searched. His email was a document of a man who had been very, very busy while appearing very, very still. The thread with Gregor Stahl went back 7 months. In the earliest emails, the language was exploratory. They were discussing the possibility of restructuring marital assets ahead of a quote-unquote strategic transition. By month 4, the language had shifted. They were discussing specific timelines. By month 6, they were coordinating document execution. There was one email, dated 5 weeks ago, where Matteo had written, "She will not understand what she is signing. Keep the language standard. She trusts me." I read that sentence 3 times. She will not understand what she is signing. I thought about the woman I had been before this marriage. I thought about the CFO I had walked back from the edge of indictment. I thought about the hostile acquisition I had stopped in a weekend. I thought about the years of forensic training, the regulatory frameworks I could recite from memory, the 3 languages I spoke with professional fluency. I thought, Matteo, you have made a catastrophic error in judgment about the intelligence of the woman you share a bed with. 50% complete. I kept searching. I found the file for the Milwaukee acquisition buried inside a folder labeled Archive 2019, which contained nothing from 2019. The file held the full deal structure, the leveraged buyout details, the collateral breakdown. And then I found something Ingrid had not anticipated. There was a second acquisition, running parallel to the Milwaukee deal. A smaller company, a cold chain logistics startup based in Indianapolis. This one was further along. The letter of intent had already been signed. And the collateral on this one was not our house. It was my personal investment account, the one I had maintained in my maiden name, Calloway, since before our marriage. The one that was supposed to be legally protected as premarital separate property. Someone had obtained the account number. Someone had listed it as available collateral on a signed letter of intent. I stared at the screen. My hands had gone very cold. This was not just wire fraud. This was identity fraud. This was the deliberate financial dismantling of a person, and it had been planned, methodically, quietly, over 7 months, by a man who kissed me on the forehead every morning and told me not to wait up. The mirror drive pinged, 100%. I ejected the drive, I closed all the windows, I cleared the cache, I left the room exactly as I had found it. I relocked the door from the outside. I called Ingrid. "Tell me you found the Indianapolis deal," she said before I could speak. "You already knew?" "I found it in the public records at 6 this morning. Serena, they used your Calloway account number. That account is in your maiden name. There is no legal pathway by which Mateo could have legitimately included it as collateral without your signed authorization." "Which means someone forged my authorization," I said. "Or they plan to, and they are counting on the deal closing before you figure it out." I sat down on the kitchen floor, not because I was overwhelmed, but because sometimes a floor is a more honest place to think than a chair. "Ingrid," I said, "I need you to find out who's holding the signed letter of intent for Indianapolis. I need to know if Ferrante's team has seen it." "Already on it," she said. "Also, Serena, I need to ask you something." "Ask." "Is there any chance Gregor Stahl is the one who fabricated the signature? Because I found something in the Delaware Incorporation documents for Ashford Meridian. The secondary address listed as a business contact for the registered agent is a mailbox service. And the mailbox service is registered to a company owned by Stahl's wife." The silence stretched. "He is not just Mateo's lawyer," I said slowly. "He is a partner in this." "That is what the paperwork suggests," Ingrid said, "which means we are looking at least 2 people who have conspired to defraud you using your own identity." I looked up at the ceiling of my kitchen. I had chosen that ceiling. I had stood in this house before we bought it and looked up at that ceiling and thought about the life we were going to build here. I had been 30 years old and completely, utterly, earnestly in love. "All right," I said, "we need to move on 3 fronts simultaneously. Ferrante's team, the bank holding the Indianapolis letter of intent, and I need to find something they do not know I have yet." "What kind of something?" Ingrid asked. "The kind that makes a grown man apologize in front of witnesses," I said. I dressed carefully for my lunch meeting with Gregor Stahl. I had texted him that morning from my personal phone, in the warm, slightly vague tone of a woman who had a question about estate planning, but was too polite to make it seem urgent. I told him Mateo had mentioned I should get my own will updated, and that I would love to treat him to lunch if he had a gap in his schedule this week. I told him Mateo was too busy with the Ferrante deal to come along, which I hoped he understood. He replied within 10 minutes. "Of course. How about today?" I had a cancellation at 12:30. Of course he did. A man who had been planning to use me as a financial instrument for 7 months was not going to miss an opportunity to keep his subject calm and compliant. I wore a pale blue wrap dress. I wore my hair loose. I wore just enough makeup to look like I had made an effort, without looking like I had prepared for anything. I looked exactly like what Gregor Stahl expected me to look like. A lovely, amiable woman who needed his guidance and trusted his expertise. The kind with leather booths and a very long wine list and a host who knew his name. He was already seated when I arrived, and he stood to greet me with both hands extended, the gesture of a man who performed warmth as a professional skill. "Serena," he said, "you look wonderful. How are you holding up with Mateo so consumed this week?" I sat down across from him. I smiled. "You know how he gets when a deal is close," I said. "I am just trying to stay out of his way and be supportive." Gregor nodded approvingly. "That is the right instinct," he said. "This is a significant moment. For him. For both of you." He had no idea how right he was. We ordered. Gregor had the duck. I had a salad I was not going to eat. We made conversation about nothing for 12 minutes, while I waited for the right angle. Then I said, casually, looking at my water glass, "Gregor, I had a question about the house paperwork. Mateo mentioned something about an equity line being set up. He said it was routine, but I wanted to make sure I understood what I would be signing. Gregor went very still, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for a woman trained to read rooms to notice. Of course, he said easily. It is fairly standard for a transaction of this size. You would be signing as a co-owner of the property, authorizing the use of equity as collateral. It protects both of you. Both of us, I repeated. It is structured to shield the asset from personal liability. It was the same lie in a different coat. The same language of protection that actually described theft. And the account, I said. The investment account in my name. The one from before we were married. Matteo mentioned something about that as well. Gregor's hand paused over his fork. He set it down. Which account is that, Serena? The Callaway account, I said pleasantly. The one at Meridian Private. I was just wondering how that fits into the structure. Because I thought premarital assets were protected. The silence was approximately 3 seconds long. But in those 3 seconds, Gregor Stahl made the decision to keep lying, and I watched him make it, and it was one of the most clarifying things I had ever witnessed. Oh, that, he said, recovering smoothly. That is just a procedural listing for the bank's due diligence. It won't actually be touched. It is simply documentation of assets. Right, I said. So my signature on that documentation is purely formal. Exactly, he said. Formality. I nodded. I smiled. I took a sip of water. Great, I said. I just wanted to hear it from you. I feel so much better. He relaxed. He picked up his fork again. He speared a piece of duck and looked at me with the comfortable satisfaction of a man who had just successfully managed a potential disruption. I spent the rest of the lunch being exactly as warm and amiable and unintimidating as he needed me to be. I let him pay. I thanked him genuinely. I told him to send my love to his wife. On the sidewalk outside, 3 steps away from the restaurant door, I pressed stop on the voice recording application, running on my secondary phone in my jacket pocket. Then I called Ingrid. I have him confirming the Callaway account inclusion and characterizing it as procedural, I said. Clear audio. That is obstruction, Ingrid said, on top of everything else. Serena, do you want me to loop in the attorney I've been working with? And Ingrid, I need one more thing. I need to know if Ferrante has seen the Indianapolis letter of intent with the fabricated authorization. I am expecting a call back from Claudia De Rosa in the next 2 hours, Ingrid said. Claudia De Rosa called me at 4:17 that afternoon. I was sitting in my car in the parking structure beneath my gym, which I had not actually entered, because I needed a location that Matteo had no reason to trace and no reason to question if he checked my whereabouts later. I had told him I was going to a yoga class. He had not asked which studio. Claudia's voice was precise and measured, the voice of a woman who had spent years working in rooms where every word was a potential legal exhibit. She said in Italian that she had received my email and had found the contents concerning. She said she had pulled the documentation her team had received from Matteo's legal representative over the preceding 3 weeks. She said that among those documents was a letter of authorization for collateral use of an investment account registered to a Serena Callaway at Meridian Private Bank. She said the signature on that authorization had been reviewed by her firm's compliance team as part of standard due diligence and had been cleared. Cleared by what standard? I asked, also in Italian. It was notarized, she said, by a notary public registered in Illinois. The notary's name is on the stamp. She paused. His name is Gregor Stahl. I closed my eyes. Gregor Stahl, who was Matteo's lawyer, who had sat across from me at lunch 6 hours ago, and called the inclusion of my account purely procedural, who had, apparently, also served as the notary on a document bearing my forged signature. He had forged my name and then notarized his own forgery. Claudia, I said carefully, I need to tell you something. That signature is not mine. I have never seen that authorization document. I was not aware my account had been listed as collateral, and I did not sign anything authorizing its use. I am prepared to share all of it with your firm's due diligence team before Thursday. Madam Callaway, she said, using my professional name deliberately. I need to speak with Signor Ferrante. I understand, I said. I am available at any time. She said she would be in touch within the hour. She called back in 40 minutes. Enzo Ferrante wanted to meet me. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. his private office in the Ferrante Capital North American headquarters on Michigan Avenue. Alone. No lawyers, no intermediaries. I said, yes. Then I drove home and made pasta for dinner, and sat across the table from my husband, and listened to him tell me about his day, and thought about how strange it was to be in the same room as someone who believed they had already won a game you had not yet begun to play. Tuesday morning. I woke at 5:30. Matteo was still asleep. I showered, dressed in the charcoal gray suit I kept for serious professional meetings, the one I had bought during my firm years and never given away, because some part of me had always known I would need it again. I put my hair up. I wore the diamond stud earrings my grandmother had left me. I looked precisely and deliberately like what I was. I told Matteo I was having breakfast with a friend from my old book club. He nodded without looking up from his phone. Already at the closing dinner. Already counting money that was not yet his and would never be. I left the house at 7:15. Ferrante Capital occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Michigan Avenue, with a view of the lake that on a clear November morning was almost aggressively beautiful. The lobby was marble and restraint. A woman at the front desk offered me water and escorted me to a conference room on the upper floor, where Claudia de Rosa was waiting. She stood when I entered, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she had spent her career looking for the specific thing people were trying to hide. She did not smile, not because she was unfriendly, but because this was not a social situation. Signore Ferrante will join us in a few minutes, she said. He asked me to begin the conversation and verify the materials you have brought. I set my laptop and the printed portfolio on the table. I opened the portfolio. I laid out the photographs, the documents, the email threads, the wire transfer confirmations. I laid out Ingrid's forensic audit summary, which she had completed and sent at 3 that morning. I laid out the audio recording from my lunch with Gregor Stahl. Claudia read everything without speaking. She asked 3 precise technical questions about the Delaware incorporation of Ashford Meridian. I answered them. She asked about the timeline of the Callaway account inclusion in the Indianapolis letter of intent. She asked whether I had contacted the bank directly. Not yet, I said. I wanted your firm to be in possession of the complete picture before anyone made contact with financial institutions. I did not want anyone to have the opportunity to restructure the paperwork before it was examined. She looked at me. You have managed situations like this before, she said. It was not a question. Professionally, yes, I said. You are a risk consultant. I was, I said. And then I was a wife, and now I think I am something in between. She almost smiled, just a fraction. The door opened. Enzo Ferrante walked in. He looked the same as he had at dinner, composed, measured, carrying the weight of his own authority, with complete ease. He looked at the documents on the table. He looked at me. He sat down. Begin, he said in Italian. And I did. I told him everything. I told him in Italian, clearly, chronologically, without drama or embellishment, the way I had learned to present complex situations to people who needed facts rather than feelings. I told him about the dinner at Cielo Blu, and what Matteo had said in Italian while I sat across the table, appearing not to understand. I told him about the documents I had found, the wire transfers, the fabricated account authorization, Gregor Stahl's dual role as lawyer and forger and notary of his own forgery. I told him about the Ashford Meridian structure, and where the $500,000 had gone and what it was intended to disguise. I told him about the Milwaukee collateral using our marital home without a legitimate co-borrower signature. I told him about the Indianapolis deal and my maiden name account, and the document that bore a signature I had not written. Ferrante listened without moving. He had the stillness of a man who had navigated very large dangers over a very long career, and had learned that stillness was itself a form of control. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You understand, he said, in Italian, that if this information is accurate, the acquisition of the Milwaukee company is built on fraudulent collateral. Yes, I said. And the Indianapolis deal carries a forged authorization that would expose my firm to liability the moment it was discovered. Yes, I said. Which would have been discovered, he said, during the post-closing audit. Almost certainly, I said. At which point your firm would be holding a signed agreement tied to collateral obtained through identity fraud. The question of who knew what and when would become the central legal issue. He looked at Claudia. She gave a small nod. He looked back at me. How long have you known your husband was planning to divorce you? Since Saturday night, I said, when he told a man he assumed I couldn't understand. Something moved across Ferrante's face. Not quite sympathy. Something more like recognition. In 40 years of business, he said, I have encountered many forms of dishonesty, but I find the domestic variety particularly distasteful. It requires a sustained performance against a person who has offered trust. Yes, I said, it does. He looked at the portfolio of documents on the table. May I keep these? He asked. They are yours, I said. I have copies. He picked up the portfolio. He held it for a moment, looking at the documents the way a judge might look at an exhibit. Then he looked at me. Madame Calloway, he said, I am going to ask my legal team to contact the appropriate regulatory bodies this afternoon. I am also going to ask that Thursday's event proceed as planned. I looked at him carefully. You want Matteo to believe the deal is still happening, I said. I want him to walk into that room on Thursday, believing he is won. And I want you to be there. He will not invite me, I said. He doesn't need to, Ferrante said. I am the host. I will invite you. I went home on Tuesday afternoon and I was a wife. I cooked. Not because I needed to, but because it was the most effective camouflage I had. A woman stirring risotto at the stove at 6 in the evening is a woman no one suspects of anything. I made Matteo's favorite. Mushroom and truffle. I opened a bottle of wine he had been saving for Thursday. I told him I wanted to celebrate his hard work a little early. He looked at me with that particular warmth people display when they feel guilty. It is a softer, more attentive version of themselves, and it would have broken my heart 6 months ago. The performance of a man trying to feel less like a villain. He poured the wine. He said I was thoughtful. He said he was going to make sure I was comfortable after everything settled. He said he wanted me to be happy. I said, of course you do. I said it gently, looking at my glass, and I meant something entirely different from what he heard. After dinner he went to his office. I heard the lock click. I went to the guest room. I opened my laptop. There was an email from Ingrid. She had found something new. It was not related to the Milwaukee deal or the Indianapolis deal. It was something older. 2 years before our marriage, Matteo had been involved in a private investment venture with 3 other partners. The venture had collapsed. One of the partners had filed a civil complaint alleging that Matteo had misrepresented the asset base of the investment to secure the other partners' contributions. The complaint had been settled quietly, confidentially, with a non-disclosure agreement that sealed the details. The partner who had filed the complaint was a woman named Rosalie Drum. Ingrid had found her. She lived in Milwaukee. I stared at that name for a long time. Rosalie Drum, in Milwaukee. And Matteo's current deal involved the acquisition of a company in Milwaukee. I typed back to Ingrid, can you find out if she has any connection to the Milwaukee company he is trying to acquire? Ingrid's reply came 12 minutes later. She is on the board. I sat back in my chair. Matteo was trying to acquire a company whose board included a woman who had once filed a civil fraud complaint against him and been silenced with a non-disclosure agreement. Either he did not know she was on the board, or he knew and believed the NDA would protect him. Either way, this was a thread that, if pulled carefully, had the potential to unravel something much larger than a bad divorce. I texted Ferrante's direct line, the one Claudia had given me that morning. There may be a prior fraud complaint relevant to the Milwaukee deal. I am sending documentation. The complainant is currently a board member of the acquisition target. His response came in under 3 minutes. I will have my team reach out to her tomorrow morning. Then one more message. Madame Calloway, I am beginning to understand why you were successful in your former career. I turned off the light in the guest room. I listened to the house breathe around me. I thought about Rosalie Drum in Milwaukee, who had once tried to hold a dishonest man accountable and been legally silenced for her trouble. I hoped she was sleeping well. Wednesday arrived with the pressure of something about to break. Matteo was up before me. When I came down to the kitchen, he was already on the phone, pacing the length of the kitchen island in his shirt sleeves. He was speaking quietly, urgently, and when he saw me come in, he moved into the hallway and pulled the kitchen door partly closed behind him. I made coffee. I listened to what I could hear through the gap in the door. He was speaking to Gregor. I could tell from the cadences. They had the rhythm of men who had been managing a shared secret for long enough that they had developed their own compressed language for it. He said, "Everything needs to be clean by tomorrow night." He said the notary copies need to be filed before noon. He said, "She has no idea." I poured my coffee. I carried it upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and I sent Ingrid one message. "Today is Wednesday. What do we still need?" She called me rather than texting. "The bank," she said. "We still need someone inside the bank to flag the Indianapolis letter of intent before it clears. I have a contact at the Regulatory Compliance Division at Meridian Private. She can put a temporary hold on any outgoing authorization against the Callaway account on the grounds of suspected identity fraud. But, Serena, once that hold goes in, Mateo's team is going to know someone is looking." "How fast?" I asked. "Hours," she said. "Maybe less. Stahl checks the deal status compulsively. Then we wait until Thursday morning," I said. "Early Thursday, 2 hours before the gala. We file the hold, we file the complaint with the Illinois Regulatory Board for attorney misconduct against Stahl. And we deliver the forensic package to the FBI field office downtown." "That is a tight window," Ingrid said. "It needs to be tight," I said. "I need Mateo to walk into that room on Thursday night, believing nothing has changed. If he finds out before he gets there, he runs. If he runs, Ferrante cannot contain the situation, and the regulatory bodies lose their best opportunity to catch everything at once." Ingrid was quiet for a moment. "You want him in the room," she said. "I want him on the stage," I said. "In front of every investor he has ever impressed. I want the moment of collapse to happen where his reputation lives." Another pause. "Serena," she said carefully, "are you sure this is about justice, and not about something else?" I thought about that honestly. I thought about the man downstairs pacing his kitchen planning my erasure. I thought about the 4 years I had spent making myself smaller. I thought about she will not understand what she is signing. But the outcome is the same either way. Wednesday evening brought an unexpected development. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen. Mateo went to answer it. I heard voices in the hallway, 2 of them, male and female. I came out of the kitchen. Standing in my entrance hall was Gregor Stahl and his wife Petra. Petra was 45, blonde, impeccably maintained, and had the particular social fluency of a woman who had spent decades navigating other people's important rooms. She was carrying a bottle of champagne. "We thought we would come by to toast the eve of the eve," Gregor said, with the expansive warmth of a man who had been relieved of guilt by the certainty of his own cleverness. "One more day." Mateo's face lit up in a way I had not seen in months. It was the face of a man who was surrounded by co-conspirators and feeling bulletproof. Petra kissed my cheeks and said I looked lovely. She handed me the champagne. She said she was so excited for Mateo, for both of us, for our future. She said it with the fluency of a woman who also knew what Thursday actually meant. I took the champagne. I went to get glasses. I stood at the kitchen counter, with my back to the door, and I breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The technique I had learned during the worst weeks of my firm years, when the pressure was enough to collapse a person who was not careful. I poured 4 glasses. I carried them out on a small tray. I handed them around with a smile. We sat in the living room. Gregor and Mateo talked about the deal in the coded, elliptical language of men, discussing something they cannot name directly in present company. Petra talked to me about a gallery opening she had attended in Wicker Park. I asked questions. I listened attentively. I was the most charming, engaged, uncomplicated version of myself. At one point, Gregor went to use the bathroom at the end of the hall. He was gone for approximately 5 minutes. When he came back, he was holding his phone, slightly differently, at an angle that suggested he had taken something out of his jacket pocket and returned it. It was a small thing, the kind of thing you only notice if you have spent years reading rooms. After they left, I went to the hallway table near the bathroom. There was a small decorative bowl where we left keys and mail. Inside the bowl was a document. Folded. It had not been there before Gregor's bathroom visit. I took it upstairs. I unfolded it in the guest room. It was a consent form, 2 pages, dense language, authorizing the use of listed assets as collateral for a commercial lending transaction. My name was on it. The line for my signature was blank. They had not yet forged it. They were planning to do it tomorrow morning, before the bank filing deadline. That meant Gregor was going to come back, or Matteo was going to present it to me and ask me to sign, tomorrow, the day of the gala, when he believed I was still manageable. I photographed every page. I sent the photographs to Ingrid. Her reply: "This is the original authorization document. The blank signature line means they need your physical signature or they are planning to add it tomorrow. Serena, this actually helps us. An unsigned document proves the timeline of the forgery." Then she sent a second message. Also, Rosalie Drum agreed to speak with Ferrante's team. She gave them the full account of the prior settlement. And Serena, the NDA Matteo made her sign, it was drafted by Gregor Stahl. I read that message twice. Gregor Stahl had drafted the NDA that silenced a previous fraud victim. He had then helped orchestrate a second fraud against me. He was not a man who had made a mistake alongside a client he trusted. He was a professional enabler of financial predators. He had done this before. I thought about Rosalie Drum. I thought about the document she had signed that told her to be silent. I thought about all the ways women are handed paperwork that tells them their own story is not theirs to tell. I put the unsigned consent form back in the hallway bowl exactly as I had found it. Then I went to bed. Thursday was 11 hours away. Thursday morning. The alarm went off at 5. Matteo silenced it quickly, trying not to wake me. He thought I was asleep. I had not slept. I had lain still for 6 hours with my eyes closed and my mind completely precisely, mechanically operational. He dressed quietly. He was going to the office early. He kissed my forehead. It felt like the period at the end of a sentence he had been writing for months. I waited. At 5:45, after I heard the garage door close, I got up. I showered. Charcoal suit again. Hair up. The diamond earrings. At 6:15 I called Ingrid. "Ready?" she said. "Ready," I said. "Initiate the bank hold." "Done," she said. "Filing now. Regulatory complaint against Stahl goes to the Illinois ARDC at 6:30. The forensic package goes to the FBI field office on Roosevelt at 7. My contact there is expecting it." "And Ferrante?" I asked. "Claudia confirmed last night. He will be at the gala as planned. His team has been briefed. His legal counsel is aware of the filing. And Serena, Rosalie Drum is flying in from Milwaukee this morning." I paused. "She is coming to Chicago?" "She wanted to be present," Ingrid said. "She said she has waited 2 years for this conversation. She asked if you would meet her for coffee before the event." Something shifted in my chest. Not weakness, the opposite of it. The specific feeling of understanding that your story is not the only one, and that sometimes justice is a collective undertaking. "Tell her yes," I said. "Tell her I will be at the Hotel Cafe across from the venue at 5. I called a car. I was not using my personal vehicle today. I was not using anything Matteo could trace. I had a ticket to the gala registered under Callaway. I had a hotel room booked at the property directly across Michigan Avenue, also under Callaway. I had, as of this morning, a meeting with Enzo Ferrante's legal team at 9. I had a forensic accountant, who had not slept in 36 hours, and was the most dedicated professional I had ever worked with. I had a woman named Rosalie Drum, flying in from Milwaukee, because she had waited 2 years to finish a sentence that had been legally cut off before she could reach the end. And I had a dress. Not the charcoal suit. That was for the morning. For the afternoon, for the gala, I had something else. I had bought it 6 months ago, before I understood everything I now understood, on a day when I had walked past a boutique on Oak Street, and seen it in the window, and thought about the woman I used to be, before I learned to take up less space. It was midnight blue. Not black. Midnight blue. The color of a sky that is not quite dark. The color of the moment just before something reveals itself. It was silk crepe, and it fell simply, and it required no performance because it was enough on its own. I had kept it in a garment bag at my consulting address. I picked it up on the way to the Ferrante meeting. The meeting with Ferrante's legal team lasted 2 hours. They reviewed everything Ingrid had prepared. They asked precise, detailed questions. They reviewed the voice recording from my lunch with Gregor Stahl. They reviewed the forensic audit. They reviewed the Indianapolis letter of intent with the fabricated authorization. At 10:30, the lead attorney, a woman named Margot Osei, looked at me across the conference table and said, "This is one of the more comprehensively documented fraud cases I have reviewed at this stage of discovery. The fact that you assembled this in 4 days is remarkable." "I had good help," I said. "You also knew what to look for," she said, "and you knew where it would be." "I spent 7 years helping people clean up situations like this," I said. "I recognized the structure." She nodded. "The FBI field office confirmed receipt of the forensic package. They are moving quickly given the number of identities involved." "Serena," she paused, "are you prepared for tonight?" "Yes," I said. "Mateo is going to be there believing the deal is closing," she said. "When it does not, and when he understands why, he's going to look for someone to blame." "I know," I said. "He may become volatile." "He may," I said. "But volatile men tend to say incriminating things in front of witnesses, and I will be recording." Margot looked at me for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "Good." At 5 o'clock, I sat across from Rosalie Drum in a hotel cafe with a view of Michigan Avenue, through a rain-streaked window. She was 51. She had short, neat hair and a way of holding her coffee cup with both hands that suggested she was someone who had learned the value of steadiness through practice rather than nature. She told me, built her company in Milwaukee over 12 years. She had been proud of it. When Mateo had approached her about a joint investment venture, she had been cautious at first, and then gradually convinced. He was charming. He was apparently competent. He spoke well about integrity in business. She had invested $400,000. When the venture collapsed and she had gone looking for her money, she found that the asset base Mateo had described simply did not exist. The properties he had listed as collateral were either encumbered, already sold, or had never been acquired at all. She had filed the civil complaint. Gregor Stahl had called her within 24 hours of the filing. He had been professional and calm, and very clear about what she was looking at in terms of legal fees and discovery exposure and reputational risk. He had offered her a settlement that covered 40% of her loss in exchange for complete silence. She had signed because she was 50 years old and exhausted, and did not have the resources for a fight. "I thought about it every day," she told me, her hands wrapped around her cup. "Every single day. Not always with anger. Sometimes just with the specific feeling of knowing you were right, and being unable to say it." I looked at her. I thought about all the women who had been handed documents that told them their truth was inconvenient. "You are going to be able to say it now," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Is it going to matter?" "Yes," I said, "because you are not the only one, and because when this is done, there is going to be a record. And that record is going to say what happened to you." Her eyes were very still and very bright. "2 years ago," she said, "someone told me the best thing I could do was move on. That making noise would cost me more than it was worth." "Someone told them the same thing once," I said, "and they gave the same advice to other people for 7 more years." She nodded slowly. She looked out the window at the rain. "What do I need to do tonight?" she asked. "Come to the gala," I said. "Sit at the table I have arranged for you, and when it is time, you will know." She put down her cup. She extended her hand across the table. I shook it. "If you feel my words right now, if you have ever been the person in that cafe, the one who was handed paperwork that told you your truth was too expensive to speak, I want you to pause for just a moment. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments what city you are listening from, because I built this story for you, and I want to know how far it travels. Help me grow this community so we can keep telling the stories that were never supposed to be told." We went upstairs to change. The gala was held at the Meridian House, a private event venue on Michigan Avenue that occupied what had once been the ground floor and ballroom level of a Gilded Age hotel. The ceilings were original plasterwork, 40 feet high. The chandeliers were enormous and old, and the kind of beautiful that makes you feel briefly like the world has more grace in it than you thought. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom held perhaps 400 people, investment bankers, venture capital associates, technology executives, a smattering of city officials who attended events like this to be photographed standing adjacent to success. the kind of room Mateo had spent his entire adult life trying to own. I arrived at 7:45. My ticket was at the door under Calloway. The woman who checked me in said my table was number 3, center left, with a direct sightline to the stage where the evening's featured transaction would be announced. I checked my coat. I accepted a glass of sparkling water. I did not want champagne tonight. I wanted to be completely clear. I was looking for Ingrid, who was attending as a guest of Ferrante's team. I found her near the bar, in a dark green dress, looking like a woman who had not spent the preceding 72 hours running a forensic investigation on 4 hours of total sleep. "How are you?" she asked. "Clear," I said. "You?" "I just got a text from my FBI contact," she said, keeping her voice low. "They filed the formal complaint this afternoon. There is an agent in this building. I do not know who or where." I absorbed that. "Good," I said. "Stahl is here," she said. "He arrived 20 minutes ago. He is at the bar." I glanced toward the bar without turning my head. Gregor Stahl was standing in a cluster of men in dark suits, laughing at something, completely at ease. He had no idea that his bar license was currently the subject of an ethics complaint filed 7 hours ago. He had no idea that the forensic audit he thought was a marital private matter had been handed to federal investigators. He was drinking a scotch and telling a story and feeling like the kind of man who wins. "And Mateo?" I asked. "Not yet," Ingrid said. "His car service is 15 minutes out," Claudia confirmed. "And Ferrante? He is upstairs. He will come down at 8:30. He asked me to tell you he is looking forward to the conversation." I nodded. I looked around the room. At the table near the window, Rosalie Drum was seated, talking to a woman beside her with the careful, composed posture of someone managing a very particular brand of courage. "Ingrid," I said. "Thank you." She looked at me. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "The interesting part hasn't happened." At 8:12, I saw Mateo walk in. He was in a navy suit that fit him impeccably. He had the particular bearing of a man who had decided that tonight was the beginning of everything. He moved through the room with expansive energy, stopping to shake hands, tilting his head to hear things people said to him, laughing with the easy authority of someone who does not yet know he is standing on broken ground. He did not see me immediately. He went to greet Gregor. They stood together, and the body language between them was the relaxed, communal confidence of two people who believe they have gotten away with something. Gregor sent something into Mateo's ear. He looked toward the stage, and then he turned, scanning the room with the habitual assessment of a man measuring his audience, and his eyes found me. I watched the sequence move across his face. Confusion first. Then something that was almost recognition, as if he was seeing a person he thought he knew from somewhere, but could not quite place. Then the specific, dawning expression of a man who has arranged a game on a board and found an extra piece. He walked toward me. He was contained, he was controlled. He was, I will give him this, a man who could manage his external presentation under pressure. He reached me and stood close, dropping his voice. "Serena," he said. "What are you doing here?" "A statement. I was invited," I said pleasantly. His eyes moved over my dress, over my posture, over something in my face that he was trying to read. "By whom?" "By the host," I said. A flicker. "Ferrante. He is a gracious man," I said. Mateo's jaw tightened. "This is not the night for whatever you think you are doing. Go home. I will call you a car. We can talk tomorrow about anything you want to discuss." "I would rather talk tonight," I said, in front of everyone. "Serena," his voice dropped to something that was almost a warning. "I am asking you nicely." "I know you are," I said, "and I appreciate it. But I think the room is about to become quite interesting, and I would hate to miss it." He looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted in his assessment of the situation. He could see that I was not the woman he had left at home to worry quietly in her kitchen. He could see it in the way I was standing, in the stillness of my hands, in the complete absence of anxiety in my posture. He took a half step back. He turned and went back to Gregor. I watched him say something quickly, urgently. Gregor's face changed. He looked toward me. He looked back at Mateo. He reached into his jacket pocket and looked at his phone. I imagined he had just discovered the bank hold on the Calloway account. The color in Gregor's face moved in a specific direction. At 8:30, Enzo Ferrante descended the staircase from the upper level. The room's energy shifted to acknowledge him. He moved through the crowd with the unhurried authority of someone who has hosted 1,000 evenings and understands the specific weight of entering a room at the right moment. He came directly to me. "Madame Calloway," he said, in Italian, and loud enough to carry. The use of my professional name in Italian, in a room where Matteo Ashford stood 15 feet away, believing I did not speak the language, landed with the precise effect of a pin pulled from a grenade. I answered in Italian, clearly, fluently, with the accent of a woman who had spent 3 formative years in Florence, absorbing a language into her bones. I said it was a beautiful evening, and that I was grateful for his invitation. I said it in the full, comfortable cadence of a native speaker, and I watched Matteo's face across the room, and I thought about the dinner at Cielo Blu, and the careful, practiced cruelty of a man who believed language was a wall he could hide behind. The wall was gone. Matteo stood completely still. He was not a man who went pale. He was a man who went very carefully expressionless, and that was its own kind of revelation. Ferrante offered me his arm. He walked me toward the center of the room, toward the stage, toward the table where the documents had been laid out for the evening's signing ceremony. The stage at the Meridian House was not a stage in the theatrical sense. It was a raised platform at the far end of the ballroom, dressed with a long table, 2 chairs, and a pair of microphones that were meant to make a business transaction look like a cultural event. There were flowers. There was lighting designed to be flattering, without being obvious about it. There was a framed rendering of the Milwaukee Company's logo mounted on an easel to the left, which would appear in every photograph taken during the signing, and would therefore appear in every press release filed the following morning. Matteo had planned this moment down to the placement of the pens. He had not planned for me to be standing next to Enzo Ferrante at the edge of the platform when the room's attention began to consolidate toward the front. Gregor had found his way to Matteo's side. I could see them speaking in the tight, compressed register of 2 men exchanging information they cannot afford to say loudly. Gregor's phone was in his hand. Matteo was listening with the focused stillness of someone receiving damage reports. The bank hold had registered. I watched Matteo look at Gregor's phone screen. I watched his face perform the calculations. The hold meant someone inside the bank had been contacted. The contact meant someone with legal standing had flagged the account. The flag meant the Indianapolis deal could not proceed on schedule, which meant something had gone wrong before tonight even started. He turned and looked at me across the room, really looked, not the dismissive, proprietary glance of a husband managing a social situation. The specific, focused, recalibrating look of a man who has just understood that his opponent is not where he left them. I met his gaze. I did not smile. I held it. He moved toward me. Ferrante felt the shift. He was a man with 60 years of negotiation in his body. He stepped almost imperceptibly forward, a small adjustment that placed him fractionally between Matteo and me. Not as a barrier, as a statement of alignment. Matteo stopped 2 feet away. He looked at Ferrante. He looked at me. He looked at the way Ferrante was standing and processed what it meant. "Signore Ferrante," he said, his voice under careful control. "I apologize for the confusion. There has been some kind of administrative error with one of our accounts. My team is resolving it now. I want to assure you there is no issue with the deal structure." Ferrante looked at him with the complete, unhurried patience of a man who knows the ending of the sentence before the other person has started it. "Matteo," he said, using the first name with the precise, deliberate authority of someone choosing informality as a demotion. "I think it would be best if we spoke privately before the program begins. My counsel is available in the room upstairs." Matteo's control slipped, just barely. "Of course. Yes. Let me just make one call." "Now," Ferrante said. Not loudly, but with the tone of a man who had not needed to raise his voice in 30 years. Matteo looked at me one more time. His eyes were doing the thing eyes do when a person is cycling through responses too quickly to settle on one. Anger, fear, calculation. Something that was almost a question he was not yet ready to ask out loud. "I believe we have some documentation to review, shall we?" She gestured toward a side room off the main ballroom. 2 of Ferrante's associates flanked the opening. Gregor looked at the associates. He looked at Margot. He looked around the room for Matteo. who was no longer visible. He went. I exhaled once, slowly, fully. Ingrid appeared at my side with 2 glasses of water. She handed me one without speaking. We stood side by side for a moment and watched the room continue its beautiful, oblivious social performance around us. "How long do you think they will be up there?" she asked. "Long enough," I said. It was 34 minutes. I know, because I was tracking it. The room had been anticipating the program's start at 8:45. By 9:19, the general atmosphere had shifted from expectation to the particular social unease of an audience that has dressed for a performance that has not yet begun. At 9:22, Enzo Ferrante came back down the staircase, alone. He walked across the ballroom floor toward the raised platform with a composed, even pace that communicated nothing and everything simultaneously. He stepped onto the platform. He adjusted the microphone. The room quieted, the way rooms do when a person of sufficient authority approaches a microphone. He looked out at the assembled guests. He said in a clear and measured voice that he wished to make a brief statement before the evening's program continued. He said that after reviewing certain material information that had come to his attention in recent days, Ferrante Capital had made the decision to withdraw from the proposed acquisition of the Milwaukee company. He said the decision was final and effective immediately. He thanked the guests for their attendance and said the evening would continue as a reception and that dinner would be served. He said it the way a man says something unpleasant that must be said, with directness and without cruelty toward anyone in the room who was not responsible for the situation. The silence that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then the room fractured into 100 simultaneous conversations. I was watching the staircase. Matteo appeared at the top of it at 9:26. He crossed the room, and I watched people see him. Watched the social calculation move through their faces as they processed what Ferrante had just said, and looked at the man whose deal had just been publicly dissolved. He came straight to me. This time he did not lower his voice. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question. An accusation wearing the shape of one. "I told the truth," I said. "You destroyed a $50 million deal," he said. His voice was climbing. The controlled exterior was developing fractures. "You went behind my back and you destroyed something it took me 3 years to build." "You spent 3 years building something on a foundation of other people's assets," I said, "including mine." "You do not know what you are talking about," he said. "I know about Ashford Meridian LLC," I said. "I know about the Indianapolis letter of intent. I know about the Callaway account authorization you had notarized by your own lawyer. I know about Rosalie Drum." The last name landed differently than the others. His face did something that I had never seen it do in 4 years of marriage. It went genuinely blank. Not composed, not strategic. Blank, the way a face goes when it has run out of prepared responses. "That was settled," he said. His voice was lower now. "That was legally settled and sealed." "Settlements seal the complainant," I said. "They do not seal the pattern." He stared at me. "Serena," he said, and for a moment, beneath the calculation and the fear, there was something that might have been the remnant of a real person who had once genuinely cared about something. "How long have you known?" "About all of it? Since Saturday," I said. "About some of it, longer than you would like to believe." He was quiet. The room was moving around us, conversations flowing, servers carrying trays of food and wine through the crowd. We stood in our own separate atmosphere. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked at him steadily. "Tonight nothing," I said. "Tomorrow your lawyers will receive documentation from a federal regulatory filing that was submitted this morning. The Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission has also received a complaint regarding Mr. Stahl's conduct as a notary. The bank has a hold on the Callaway account pending an identity fraud review. And Rosalie Drum has provided a full account of the prior settlement to Ferrante's legal team, who have shared it with the appropriate authorities." He absorbed this in silence. "I did not want this," he said. It was almost quiet enough to be genuine. "You wanted everything that led to this," I said. "The wanting this part came along with the rest of it." He looked away. He looked at the room, at the people who had come to celebrate his success, at the rendering of the Milwaukee Company logo, still standing on its easel, near the stage. He looked like a man watching the last possible version of his future, close. "The house," he said. "The postnup." "The postnup was signed with a pen that uses heat-erasable ink," I said. "The signature is gone. And even if it were not, a postnuptial agreement signed without full financial disclosure and presented fraudulently as an insurance document is unenforceable in Illinois. My attorney has already filed the preliminary paperwork." He turned back to me. His eyes were very still. "You planned all of this," he said. "You gave me 4 days," I said. 4 days is enough time for a woman who knows what she is doing." And then a man in a dark suit, who had been standing near the left wall of the ballroom since before the program was supposed to begin, moved quietly through the crowd toward us. He showed Matteo a credential. He said Matteo's name. He said there were some questions that needed to be addressed this evening, and asked if Matteo would be willing to step outside. Matteo looked at the credential. He looked at me. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. I stood in the middle of the ballroom of the Meridian House, and I breathed. The room continued around me. Servers with trays, the sound of crystal and conversation, the particular ambient music of 400 people navigating a social situation that had been reframed without warning. Across the room, near the window table, Rosalie Drum was speaking to Claudia de Rosa. Rosalie's posture had changed over the course of the evening. She was sitting differently. Something released. Ingrid appeared at my shoulder again. "He is going to be interviewed tonight," she said quietly. "My contact says it is preliminary. They are not arresting anyone this evening. But the filing creates a legal obligation to cooperate, and there are hold conditions on his accounts as of an hour ago." "And Gregor?" I asked. "Still in the side room with Margot," she said. "He asked for his own attorney approximately 20 minutes ago. They are waiting for her to arrive." I nodded. "Serena," Ingrid said, "you should know you are going to have a complicated few months ahead. The asset freeze during the investigation, the divorce proceedings, the deposition process." "I know," I said. "It is not clean from here," she said. "It is just different." "Different is enough," I said. Then she said something she had never said to me before in all the years I had known her, through the crisis management work, through the late nights, and the hard rooms, and the situations that looked impossible from the outside, and were navigated through anyway. She said, "You did good." I looked at her. I thought about 4 years. I thought about the version of myself I had folded down to fit inside a marriage that was designed to diminish me. I thought about the morning at the kitchen sink at 2:30 when I had decided to stop. "We did good," I said. She accepted that. I raised mine. Ferrante found me near the window 20 minutes later. The room had settled into its alternate configuration, a dinner reception rather than a celebration, which in many ways had a more honest energy. People were eating. The band had resumed. The social machinery had processed the disruption and incorporated it and moved on, because social machinery always does. Ferrante carried 2 glasses of wine. He offered me one. I accepted it. We stood at the window looking out at Michigan Avenue in the November rain. The headlights of the cars below moved in long amber streaks across the wet street. "I owe you an explanation," he said, in Italian. "You do not," I said. "For what I said at dinner, in Italian, in front of you. Or rather, what I did not say." I looked at him. "When your husband made those remarks," he said carefully, "I was not comfortable. But I did not challenge them. I allowed the conversation to proceed, because the business context felt more urgent to me than the human context. That was a failure of judgment." I was quiet for a moment. "You did not know I understood," I said. "No," he said. "But I knew what was being said, and I said nothing. I am sorry for that." I thought about all the rooms in all the years where things had been said that should have been challenged and were not, because the business context felt more urgent, because the social cost of speaking felt too high, because silence was easier to justify than it was to defend. "Thank you," I said, "for saying so." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I meant what I said about the consulting position. I am in genuine need of someone who understands both the regulatory landscape and the human landscape. Someone who can see the whole room." "I know," I said. "I am considering it." "What would help you decide?" I thought about it honestly. Time, I said. A few months. I have some things to untangle first. The offer does not expire, he said. I thought about the document that had told her the cost of her own truth was too high. I thought about all the paperwork in all the world that is designed to tell women that their experience is a liability. You should not have had to hold it that long, I said. No, she said. But here we are. Here we are. I thought about what it meant to arrive at a particular moment, via a route you would not have chosen, and find, despite everything, that you were still standing. That you were not broken. That the silence had not been the end of the story. What will you do now? I asked her. Go home, she said. Sleep, and then I think talk to a lawyer about what the NDA actually covers, now that there is an active federal investigation. Apparently sealed agreements have interesting limitations in that context. They do, I said. Your story is yours to tell again. She looked at me. Something in her eyes was very steady and very warm. So is yours, she said. I left the Meridian house at 11:15. I took a different car service home, one I had booked through the consulting account. The driver did not know my name or my address. He knew the destination I had typed and the route the app had suggested. It was ordinary and anonymous, and it felt, after the weight of the preceding 4 days, like an extraordinary luxury. I sat in the back seat and looked at Chicago moving past the windows in the rain. I thought about what the apartment was going to feel like when I got home. Mateo's coat would still be in the hallway closet, his books on the shelf in the study, his running shoes by the back door, the particular architecture of a shared life that does not dismantle itself on a schedule that corresponds to the moment the marriage ends. I thought about the morning I would have to sit down with a lawyer and begin the formal process. I thought about depositions and asset disclosures and the months of procedural machinery that stood between where I was and where I needed to be. I thought about my firm, the one I had sold at Mateo's request for less than it was worth, because I was in love, and I trusted him. I thought about whether it was too late to build something like it again, differently this time, with everything I now knew about what I was capable of and what I was not willing to give away. I thought it was probably not too late. I got home at 11:40. I unlocked the door. The apartment was dark and still. I turned on the lamp in the entry. I took off my coat. I hung it in the closet. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. While I waited for it to boil, I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the back garden in the November dark. The same garden I had stood looking at 4 days ago, when I had begun to think through what needed to happen. The same dark, bare shapes of the trees, the same cold glass. But the woman standing at the sink was different. Not transformed in the way stories sometimes suggest transformation happens, in a single clean moment of revelation. Different the way things that have been under pressure for a long time become different when the pressure is released. Something settled back into its original shape. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Ingrid. It is done. Get some sleep. And then, a minute later, a second message. You were always the smartest person in the room. You just let someone convince you to hide it. Don't do that again. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the counter. The kettle boiled. I made tea. I carried it to the small table in the kitchen window where I liked to sit in the mornings, when the light came in from the east. The table where I had eaten breakfast alone for 4 years, pretending not to notice how much of my own life I had stopped inhabiting. I sat down. I looked at the garden. I drank my tea. The months that followed were not simple. I want to be honest about that, because stories that end with the dramatic resolution and skip the aftermath are doing a disservice to the people who lived through them. The federal investigation moved with the particular deliberate patience of institutional processes that are built to be thorough rather than fast. Mateo's assets were frozen during the preliminary review. Gregor Stahl voluntarily surrendered his law license while the disciplinary process was ongoing, which his attorney advised as the most strategic available option, and which the disciplinary board received as a tacit acknowledgement of the underlying conduct. The Milwaukee acquisition was unwound by Ferrante's team within 2 weeks, with the board of the target company issuing a statement that referenced undisclosed material irregularities in the proposed transaction. Rosalie Drum gave a deposition in January that lasted 6 hours and covered both the prior settlement and its relationship to the pattern of conduct in the current investigation. Her attorney filed a motion to have the original NDA vacated on the grounds that it had been used to facilitate concealment of ongoing fraudulent conduct. The motion was granted in February. The divorce was filed in December and contested in the way that divorces always are, when one party believes they have more to lose, and the other has already decided what they are and are not willing to accept. I was not willing to accept very little. My attorneys were very clear about that from the first meeting. The premarital Callaway account was protected. The house, given the circumstances of the equity fraud, was treated as a separate matter pending the outcome of the federal investigation. A court-appointed financial examiner was assigned to review the full asset picture. In March, I received a call from a woman I had worked with briefly during my firm years. She ran a small financial consulting practice in London and was looking to open a North American office. She wanted to know if I would consider a partnership arrangement. She had heard, she said carefully, that I had been doing some independent work recently that had produced quite significant results. I told her I needed 2 more months. She said she could wait. In April, I sat at a table in a conference room in downtown Chicago with my attorney, and Mateo's attorney, and a mediator, and we agreed on the terms of a settlement. I will not detail the exact numbers, because they are not the point. The point is that I left that room with everything I had brought into the marriage legally returned to me, and with a settlement that accounted for the 4 years during which my professional earning capacity had been deliberately suppressed at Mateo's request. The settlement included a provision related to the sale of my firm, specifically the differential between what it had been worth and what I had sold it for, and the circumstances under which I had been persuaded to sell. My attorney had argued that the undervalued sale obtained through deliberate misrepresentation about the conflict of interest it purportedly created constituted a form of economic coercion. The mediator agreed. I walked out of that building into an April afternoon with the specific lightness of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just put it down for good. In May, I flew to Milan, not for Ferrante, though I had in the intervening months accepted a modified version of his consulting offer, a project-based arrangement rather than a full-time position, which gave me the flexibility I needed while I rebuilt my own practice, not for any strategic reason. I flew to Milan because I had not been back to Italy since my years in Florence, and because the woman who had lived there at 23 had been someone who belonged entirely to herself, and I wanted to go back and remember what that felt like before I built the next version of my life. I spent 4 days there. I walked, I ate, I sat in piazzas in the morning with coffee and notebooks, and wrote down things I was thinking about that I did not want to forget. I visited the Pinacoteca di Brera and stood in front of a painting I had stood in front of 20 years ago, and remembered exactly what I had felt looking at it then. Something about the quality of the light in Mantegna's Dead Christ. The particular honesty of looking at a difficult thing without flinching. On the 3rd afternoon, sitting at a cafe table with the late spring sun on the stones of the street, I got a message from Rosalie Drum. It said, "Hearing scheduled for June. My attorney says we have a very strong case. I wanted you to know." I wrote back, "I will be there if you want me." She replied, "I do." I put down my phone, I picked up my coffee, I looked at the street. I thought about a night in November in Chicago, sitting in my car in a parking garage, calling a forensic accountant at 4 in the afternoon. I thought about standing at a kitchen sink at 2:30 in the morning, deciding to stop. I thought about a document with a blank signature line that someone planned to fill in by morning. I thought about a woman in a dark red coat saying, "Here we are. Here we are." I thought about all the versions of myself that had existed in the span of 33 years. The girl who had studied 3 languages because she loved the feeling of a mind expanding. The woman who had built a firm from nothing and learned to walk into rooms on fire. The wife who had set all of that down because she loved someone who told her she was more valuable quiet. The woman who had sat in a restaurant booth on a Saturday evening and understood, in the language she was not supposed to understand, that the setting down had been by design. The one sitting in Milan with coffee and a notebook, and the specific, uncomplicated feeling of a person who has returned to themselves after a long time away. I opened the notebook. I wrote at the top of the new page, what I know now that I did not know before. And then I wrote for a long time, not because I planned to share it, just because it was mine and it was true, and I had spent too many years not writing the things that were mine and true. 6 months after the gala at the Meridian House, I sat in the offices of my new firm, on the 14th floor of a building on Wacker Drive. The name on the door said Callaway Advisory Group. It was a Tuesday morning in early June. The lake was visible from the window. The sun was doing what it does on good Chicago mornings, arriving with more conviction than the weather has any right to promise. My first 2 clients had signed the previous week. One was a mid-sized financial services company, navigating a regulatory review they had not expected. The other was a woman who had recently left a senior position at a tech firm under circumstances she described carefully as complicated, and who needed help structuring the transition. I had taken both cases immediately. My partner in London had sent me a plant for the office, a large, dark-leafed thing in a ceramic pot that looked deliberately chosen to suggest permanence. The card said, "To Callaway Advisory Group, may it outlast everything built to diminish it." I had set the plant by the window. I had a call at 9 with Ingrid, who had agreed to a formal consulting arrangement with the firm. Because Ingrid was the best forensic accountant I had ever worked with, and also because she had told me in November that she had been waiting for me to do something like this for years, and she was not going to miss it. At 9:15, my assistant buzzed me to say that a Signor Ferrante was on the line. I picked up. "Madame Callaway," he said, "I see the new firm is operational." "As of last week," I said. "I have a situation," he said. "The details are complicated." "They usually are," I said. "Are you available to travel in the next 2 weeks?" I looked at my calendar. I looked at the lake through the window. I looked at the name on the glass door of my office. "I am," I said. "Send me the brief." I hung up. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the case file on the financial services client. I began to read. I am telling you this story because I was told for 4 years that I was not the right person to tell it. I was told in small ways and large ones. I was told by exclusion from rooms, by being handed forms to sign without being shown the contents, by being spoken about in a language someone believed I could not understand. I was told by a man who loved me, once genuinely, and then decided that the version of me that was easiest to manage was also the version of me that did not speak. I am telling it now because Rosalie Drum could not tell hers for 2 years, and I want you to understand that sealed documents and binding agreements and the weight of legal language do not erase what happened. The stories exist whether or not they are permitted. I am telling it because the woman at the kitchen sink at 2:30 in the morning who decided to stop is every woman who has ever stood somewhere alone late at night and thought, "This is not the whole of what I am." She is right, it is not. I want you to understand something about the 4 days in November. I did not execute that plan. I did not do it because I was fearless, or because I had nothing to lose. I was afraid every day of those 4 days, a specific operational kind of fear that sharpens attention rather than collapsing it. I was afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of not being believed. I was afraid that the person who had spent 4 years convincing me I was less capable than I actually was had partially succeeded. That somewhere in the accumulated weight of being told you are smaller than you are, a part of you begins to believe it. What I held on to was this. I had been in rooms that were on fire before. I knew that the person who stays calm and reads the room accurately, and acts precisely and does not flinch has an advantage that no amount of legal complexity can entirely remove. I had that. And I had Ingrid, who worked for 36 hours without sleep, because she believed the truth should be documented. And I had Rosalie Drum, who got on a plane from Milwaukee because she had waited 2 years for the sentence she had been prevented from finishing. And I had Enzo Ferrante, who had the integrity to look at evidence clearly, even when it dismantled a deal he had been building toward. And I had Claudia De Rosa, who had spent her career making sure the due diligence was real rather than performed. It took all of us. I want you to remember that, because the version of this story that makes it about one exceptional woman doing it all alone is a story that leaves out the other women, and the other women are the part that matters most. Rosalie Drum's hearing is in June. I will be there. Ingrid is building out a new forensic methodology for cases involving identity fraud in marital asset contexts. She is writing about it. I am helping. The Callaway Advisory Group is 6 months old and has 3 cases active and 2 more in preliminary discussion. My partner in London is coming to Chicago in August. We are going to talk about the next phase. Mateo's case is proceeding through the federal process at the pace these things proceed. I have given my deposition. I believe her. I do not spend time thinking about what Mateo is doing on any given day. That is not indifference. It is just the particular clarity that comes from finally understanding the difference between what is yours to carry and what belongs to someone else's accounting. The apartment has been sold. The bank recovered its collateral, and there was a surplus that went to the estate settlement. I have a smaller place now, 2 floors in a building in Lincoln Park, with a kitchen that faces east and gets good morning light. It is mine, entirely, in every legal and personal sense. There is no one else's name on the deed. There is no one else's version of my life contained in the walls. I filled it with things I chose, books I had been meaning to read for years. A print I bought at the Art Institute on a Sunday afternoon, when I walked through alone and took as long as I wanted. A small table by the window where I have coffee every morning and sometimes just look at the street. Simple things, ordinary things, the kind of things that feel extraordinary when they are finally completely your own. Last week, a woman sent me a message through a professional contact. She said she had heard, through someone who knew someone, that I had navigated a complicated situation last year that involved financial fraud and a high-stakes corporate context. She said she thought she might be in something similar. She said she did not know where to start. I wrote back the same day. I told her to start by writing down everything she knew, everything, in a private document no one else could access, not for anyone else, just to get it out of her head and into a form she could see clearly. I told her to call her bank and ask what documents were on file related to any of her accounts, just to check, just to know. I told her that whatever she found or did not find, she was not wrong for looking. Looking is not disloyalty. And information is the only thing that belongs to you completely and unconditionally. No one can freeze it. No one can transfer it. No one can include it in a collateral agreement without your knowledge. I told her to find someone she trusted, professionally, someone with the specific skills the situation required. I told her that asking for help is not weakness. I told her that I had asked for help at 11 at night from a woman I had not spoken to in 2 years, and that it had made all the difference. And I told her that the story was not over just because someone had worked very hard to make her feel like it was. She wrote back the next morning. She said, "Thank you. I needed to hear that it was possible." Possible. I thought about a booth at Cielo Blue, and a dinner in Italian, and a woman holding a water glass and thinking quietly, "You have made a very serious mistake." I thought about the version of myself that had walked out of that restaurant on a Saturday night and said nothing, smiled, played the role, and then gone home and done the thing that actually mattered. I thought, it is always possible, not always easy, not always safe, not always clean or fast or guaranteed. Always possible. The woman who knows everything and says nothing is the most dangerous thing in any room. Not because the silence is power, but because the moment she decides to speak, nothing prepared for her silence can contain what comes next. And that is where I leave you. Not with a tidy ending, because life does not offer those, but with a true one. I am 33 years old, and I am sitting in an office, with my name on the door and the lake in the window, and a plant someone sent me that is supposed to suggest permanence. I have work I love, and cases that matter, and colleagues I trust, and mornings that are mine from beginning to end. I have the language I was supposed to not understand. I have the receipts. And I have this, the story itself, which belongs to me, which no document can seal, which I am choosing to tell in my own words, in my own voice, to whoever is listening. If you have been listening, I want to say one last thing to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying with this story from the beginning to wherever you are now. If any part of it felt true to something you have carried, I want you to know that the carrying is not the whole of the story. There is always a next chapter that has not been written yet. And the person who writes it is you. If my words found you today, if this story sat somewhere in your chest the way true things do, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And leave me a comment telling me what city you are writing from. I want to know how far a woman's voice can travel when she stops being afraid to use it. Help me build this community, because we are just getting started. And there are so many more stories like this one waiting to be told. Stories of women who were underestimated, who were handed paperwork designed to diminish them, who sat up late at night at kitchen sinks deciding to stop, and who did something about it. This channel is for them. This channel is for you. I will see you in the next story.